Before we get started going through a lot of the Objective-C and writing an application for an iPhone or an iPad, I want to take a minute to talk about probably the most frustrating thing for me when it came time to actually learn Objective-C. To me, it's the most drug-induced part of the entire programming language. I do not understand, even now that I know what it's doing and understand what it's doing. I don't know what anybody was thinking when they thought this was a good idea. There's lots of people out there that proclaim this as being the best programming language in the world because it's self-explanatory and all that kind of stuff, and the only thing that I can say is bullshit. This programming language uses functions in a way that just absolutely don't make any sense to me whatsoever. But I'm going to explain this in this video so that we can get past it and learn the language to do what we need to do with it. After you grasp what I'm about to show you, you can use it. It does not make it easy to use. It doesn't make it more self-explanatory. Reading Objective-C code is just as difficult as reading any other code. In fact, to me, it's more difficult because the function and variable names are just retardedly long. So let's get to it. So what we're looking at here is a typical function call. This makes sense. We have a return type that we have here. We have the function name. And then in this case, we can very easily see that we have two variables that we're passing to the function. And then these are the actual names of those variables inside of our code. Now, probably 98% of the programming languages that you would go out and do anything with, they're going to have some syntax that's very closely related to this. So let's take a look at what a function looks like inside of Objective-C. The first thing that you have to understand is that the system is going to have the function declaration is going to look fairly close to this. Well, not really. We would have, let's say we're going to write a function called add numbers. So we're going to return an int type, and we're going to call our function add numbers. And I'm not trying to get into the exact format of all this stuff. I just want to kind of show you the basics. So we've got our function name is add numbers, and we're going to put a colon, and then we're going to put the type of variable that we're going to send. So in our above example, we sent in an int. We'll send an int here. And then locally, we're going to call this j. So right now, we have a function name called add numbers, and it has one integer argument that is j that we're going to call. So let's look at what this function call would look like. Now up here, it's very simple. You're going to call main, and you're going to pass it, a 1. If we're doing add numbers, you just pass it the variables. So it's very simple. Now, the argument with Objective-C is that, well, doing this, you don't really know what these two variables are because you're just passing two numbers in. And that is true. With that respect, there is a good argument that I don't really know what this is. But then if I don't know what these arguments are, I could have never called main in the first place. So I need to go look and see what they are to be able to call it. So the argument to me doesn't really hold water for very long. It's a good semantical argument, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the complexity of the language. So let's look at the way that I would call this. Well, the first thing is that all Objective-C functions are going to be related to some class. So in other entry videos, I went through what a class is, so I'll kind of skip over that. But let's just say that we have a class called C1 that we're working with. So to call this function, and it's part of C1, I first am going to do an open square bracket. I'm going to give it the class instance that we're actually working with. I'm going to have a space. I'm going to have the function name. So this is going to be add numbers. And then we're going to have a colon. And then we're going to pass it whatever it is that we want to pass into J. So let's say we're passing in a 2. So you can already see that the difference between the function declaration and the actual use of the function is a little strange. One, we have to tell it the class instance that we're actually working with, which, that's not that big of a deal. Most programming languages would do something like this with a dot notation, which to me makes a whole lot more sense and is a lot easier to read, but whatever. The other thing is this :2. Again, most programming languages would tell it to add 2 and you'd be done. Here I have to put a :2. Here's where everything, in my opinion, goes completely awry. Right now, with one variable, I am kind of referring to the function name as add numbers. Well, if I really wanted to have a function called add numbers and I wanted to have 2 variables, let's take a look at what that's going to look like. So we're going to return an int value. The function name is add numbers. We're going to have a colon, our int variable called j. Now, here's where we do our second variable. So let's say that we're going to have another variable called second num, colon, it's going to be an integer as well, and we're going to call it p. So now you can kind of start to see why I hate Objective-C. This is not very explanatory. We have 2 variables here, but here's where things get confusing. Our function name is no longer add numbers. Our function name just became add numbers colon second number. So now it's not just a simple matter of me having a function name I'm calling. Now I've got a function name that actually has 2 names. And if I have 3 variables or 4 variables, you keep stacking these things up. Now, the example that we have here, if I wanted to call this, let's look at how I would call it. Again, we're referring to class C1 instance. I'm going to call add numbers, or well, that's what we called it, add numbers, colon 2, and then we're going to have a space and we're going to give it the second num, colon 3. So the argument here is, by looking at this, I can see that I'm working with class C1. I'm calling the function called add numbers second number, and I'm passing it variables 2 and 3. So I can see exactly what the variable names are that I'm passing in and what the values are that I'm passing into the function, where up here, if we did it in the C format, you're just passing in a 1 and 2, and you really don't know what the 2 variables are called. Now, the thing that frustrates me about this is this variable is really not the variable. This is the name of the parameter, or the name of the function thing, whatever you want to call it, that we're passing in, but the local variable that we're going to be working with inside that function is actually called p, and the local variable for this is actually called j. So down here inside of our function, you're going to have your return is going to be working with j plus p, not second number and first number, or whatever it happens to be. And then that brings up the next problem, is that I'm trying to pass in 2 numbers. My function name needs to be something that's fairly self-explanatory, so having this say first number really doesn't make any sense. But then what do we name the second number? Because that's really not the variable name, it's some other piece of this function that we're calling. So in my opinion, this is just craziness. Unfortunately, we have no alternative. If you're going to write programs in Mac or iPhone or iPad, we've got to get past all of this craziness and just deal with it. Like I said, I wish there was some other way to write programs for Mac, but unfortunately, this is the best that they can give us. So just understand that when we're writing these functions and dealing with these functions, we really are having to name these things, and you're going to see too, some of the names of these things are paragraphs. They're not really a variable name. They're not really a function name. They're great big huge long declarations of intelligence. I don't know how you classify some of this stuff, but just understand that when you see things like this inside of these square brackets, that you're actually making function calls inside of Objective-C. And if you see things where you got multiple things inside of the square brackets, then you have multiple variables that you're dealing with, and you'll see some of the things. This is not the best example in the world, but some of the things make a little bit more sense. And you'll kind of start to see this here in just a little bit when we get into the next video of working with arrays in Objective-C.